choosing to testify.
Thank you very much. So that will conclude the public testimony and the public hearing on House Bill 1614, and would like to invite our nonpartisan staff to brief us on House Bill 1652. I believe we have Ms. Baker and Mr. Mazur-Hart. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Chair Ormsby, members of the committee. For the record, Yelena Baker, staff to the Civil Rights and Judiciary Committee. House Bill 1652 relates to child support pass-through. By way of brief background, as a condition of receiving benefits under the TANF program, a family must assign its rights to child support to the state during the months that the family receives TANF assistance. Assigned child support collections are retained and shared by the state and federal government as partial reimbursement for TANF assistance. Federal law requires the state to remit to federal government a certain portion of that collected child support. This is known as the federal share, and it varies by state. For Washington state, that's 50%, meaning that the state has to remit to federal government 50% of the child support collected on behalf of TANF families. The state is permitted to retain or pay to TANF families the remaining 50%, which is known as the state share. Federal law also allows the state to pass through to a TANF family up to a certain amount out of that federal share of collected child support without having to reimburse the federal government for that amount. This is known as the child support pass-through. If the state implements child support pass-through, federal law requires that the state disregards the amount, the pass-through amount, when calculating the family's TANF benefit. Current federal limits on child support pass-through is up to $100 a month for a TANF family with one child and up to $200 a month for a family with 2 or more children. In Washington, beginning in early 2021, the DSHS implemented partial child support pass-through at about half of that amount. So currently, families receiving assistance are passed through up to $50 a month for a family with one child and up to $100 a month for a family with 2 or more children. House Bill 1652 requires that beginning on July 1st, 2024, the DSHS pass through all current child support and child support arrears collected on behalf of a TANF family. The DSHS must disregard and not count as income any child support passed through to the family when determining the family's eligibility or the amount of TANF or Work First benefit. That concludes my remarks. I'll pass it off to Matt for the discussion of fiscal impact.
Thank you.
Well, Mr. Chair, members of the committee, for the record, Matt Mazur-Hart, staff to the committee. There's a fiscal note for the bill in your EBB. Most of the costs come from the state general fund. And as Yelena mentioned, because there's a July 1, 2024 start date, the costs in the 25-27 biennium are significantly higher than the costs in the 23-25 biennium. There's essentially 5 different cost drivers to the bill. I'll walk through each one briefly and then give a total cost at the end. The first cost driver is related to the fact that DSHS would no longer be retaining any child support. As Yelena mentioned, 100% of that would be passed through to the families. Currently, DSHS retains some of the child support it collects for TANF families and uses that money to pay for its share of the TANF program, which is approximately $140 million each year. This helps them subsidize roughly $6 million per year of that TANF obligation that the state has to provide grants and services to TANF families. So now that it would be passing this money through to families, it would need an extra $6 million from the general fund in fiscal year 25 to cover those costs. And it would need approximately $10.9 million from the general fund in the 25-27 biennium. Child support receipts are expected to decrease slightly in the forecast, so it's a little bit lower in the out years, but it would need money from the general fund to support the TANF program fully. That's the first cost driver. The second cost driver is what Yelena mentioned about the state's obligation to pay the federal government for a portion of the child support that it collects. Currently, the retained child support part of that is used to pay that federal obligation. If they're passing through all of that money to families now, they would again need more general fund state dollars to meet that federal obligation. They estimate that that will be $3.9 million in the 23-25 biennium. The small silver lining here is that the state would be passing through more money to families up to that 100, 200 level. So the federal government would waive more of the state's requirements. So the state would actually be paying less to the federal government, but it would need that general fund state money in order to make the full payment. So from 3.9 million now down to 3 million with that extra waiver. That's in fiscal year 25. It would be roughly 5.6 million total in 25-27 to pay the federal government for its share. The third cost driver, and they get a little bit more simple from here on out, would be to pay for the extra number of families on the TANF caseload, because families on TANF that receive more child support than their grant for 2 consecutive months would no longer be removed from the TANF program under this new bill. They would be able to stay on TANF. So the caseload would gradually increase. The workforce services would gradually increase. There'd be 1 to 2 FTEs associated with that. DSHS estimates the cost of that is $3.1 million in the 23-25 biennium, and then $13.1 million in the 25-27 biennium. Fourthly, there will be some IT costs that DSHS needs in fiscal year 24 to make modifications to its benefit systems to support the new bill. That would be paid for roughly half federal funds, half general state funds. And then the fifth cost driver is an increase in the Working Connections Child Care Program, which typically happens when there are more TANF families on the caseload that qualify for Working Connections. So DCYF estimates that the cost of that would be $900,000 from the general fund in fiscal year 25. And then 3.2 million, again, as that TANF caseload gradually starts to increase in the 25-27 biennium. So those are the cost drivers of the bill. Altogether, DSHS estimates that the cost would be $13.5 million from the general fund in the 23-25 biennium, and then $32.5 million from the general fund in the 25-27 biennium. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you both for the thorough briefing. Any questions of Ms. Baker or Mr. Mazurhart? Not seeing any questions. Thank you again. We'll go to public testimony. Representative Gregerson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let's go ahead and bring forward Alex Herr, and then on the phone or remote, we have Brady Horenstein. Alex, when you're ready.
Good afternoon, Chair Ormsby, Ranking Member Stokesbury, and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Alex Herr, testifying on behalf of the Statewide Poverty Action Network in support of House Bill 1652. I really want to thank staff for such an excellent and thorough summary, but really the bottom line of the problem we're trying to solve is the fact that currently the state is taking child support payments to pay for a general fund obligation. What this bill really attempts to do is act on a partial measure that the legislature passed unanimously back in 2020 with Senate Bill 5144 by implementing a partial pass-through. And we know that from experience that implementing a child support pass-through increases monthly child support payments by as much as 28%. Knowing that the payment will reach their child is an incentive for the non-custodial parent to pay the child support. Although we weren't successful back in 2020 implementing a full pass-through policy, it wasn't because it wasn't the right thing to do. Back then, I remember being involved in the negotiations when it was a budget consideration. At that time, implementing the full pass-through policy was just not feasible, but we hope that this is the year that we say we're not going to collect child support payments from the state and then use it to fund the TANF program, and rather make sure those dollars reach the child and the custodial parent. We encourage this bill before you and hope that we can pass it this year. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Herr.
Good afternoon, members of the committee and Mr. Chair. My name is Brady Hornstein. I'm here in person, actually. So thank you for the opportunity to testify. I'm here on behalf of DSHS and the Division of Child Support. In the interest of time, I'll just reference that you should have or soon will receive a letter from our Assistant Secretary, Tony Bowie, about this bill, and we look forward to working with staff and advocates and others on this bill as it progresses. I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Representative Gregerson.
Thank you. That's it for this bill.
Thank